Hi, good morning. This is the story called The Indian Captive, The Story of Mary Jemison. It is by Lois Lenski. I chose this book for our interactive read aloud while we're working remotely because it has to do a lot with our social studies and where we started the year. Uh, at the beginning of the year in social studies, we talked a lot about pilgrims coming to America, the colonization of the American colonies. And this book takes place in 1758. So before America becomes its own nation, when we're still part of Britain, we're British colonies. And it's a story based on the accounts of Mary Jemison. She was a Scotch-Irish girl. And in the book, she's referred to as Molly. Her parents and her family affectionately call her Molly. But she is actually taken captive by some Indians and Frenchmen, which is really interesting. So we're going to get started with this book today, and I'll be posting videos so that way you can keep up with us. So chapter 1 says, "Come what may. Molly, child, now supper's done. Go fetch neighbor Dixon's horse." Molly looked up at her father. At the far end of the long table he stood. He was lean, lanky, and raw-boned. Great knotty fists hung at the ends of his long, thin arms. His eyes looked kind, though his face was stern. "All I need is another horse for a day or two," the man went on. "Neighbor Dixon said I could borrow his. I'll get the south field plowed tomorrow and seeded to corn." "Yes, Pa," answered Molly. She reached for a piece of corn pone from the plate. She munched it contentedly. How good it tasted! Corn. All their life was bound up with corn. Corn and work. Work to grow the corn, to protect it and care for it, to fight for it, to harvest it, and to stow it away for winter's food. So it was always, so it would be always, to the end of time. How could they live without corn? The Jemison family sat around the supper table. Its rough-hewn slabs, uncovered by cloth, shone soft-worn and shiny clean. A large earthen bowl, but a short time before filled with boiled and cut-up meat, sat empty in the center. Beside it, a plate with the leftover pieces of corn pone. "You hear me?" asked Thomas Jemison again. "You ain't dreaming." The two elder boys, John and Tom, threw meaningful looks at their sister, but said no word. Betsy, tall, slender 15-year-old, glanced sideways at their mother. Molly colored slightly and came swiftly back from dreaming. "Yes, Pa," she said obediently. She reached for another piece of corn pone. Inside, she felt a deep content. Spring was here again. So I think this is an interesting point to stop and talk real quick. So spring is often a time of like renewal and rebirth. We see a lot of animals start to come out from their hibernations, or baby deer and baby cows start to be born. So it's really like a whole new world comes in spring. And here she is, Molly or Mary, is feeling really just at peace with what's going on in the world. And what we know to come is that pretty soon the world is going to change. In the foreword and in her stories, it also says that she, out of her family, is the only one taken captive that is not killed. So it's interesting to kind of start taking note of her character and how her character grows and changes in this book. And why would the Indians choose not to kill her? What is significant about Mary, or who they affectionately call Molly? She saw round, pale yellow grains of seed corn dropping from her hand into the furrow. She saw her long, thin arms waving to keep the crows and blackbirds off. The fight had begun. The wind blew her long, loose hair about her face, and the warm sun kissed her cheeks. Spring had come again. "Can't one of the boys go?" asked Miss Jemison. "Dark's a-comin', and the trail's through the woods." "Have you forgot the chores?" Thomas Jemison turned to his wife and spoke fretfully. "There's the stock wants tendin'. They need fodder to chomp on through the night, and the milkin' not even started. Sun's got nigh 2 hour to go 'fore dark. Reckon that's time enough for a gal to go a mile and back." "But it's the woods trail," began Miss Jemison anxiously. "'Tain't safe at night time." "Then she can sleep at Dixon's and be back by sunup," said the girl's father, glancing sternly in Molly's direction. He sat down on a stool before the fireplace and began to shell corn into the wooden dye tub. "Mary Jemison, do you hear me?" he thundered. Yes, Pa, said Molly again, but she did not move. She sat still, munching cornbone. Jane Jameson said no more. Instead, she looked down at her hands folded in her lap, her hands so seldom at rest. She was a small, tired-looking woman, baffled by both work and worry. 8 years of life in the frontier settlement in eastern Pennsylvania had taken away her fresh youth and had aged her beyond her years. Little Matthew, a boy of 3, climbed into his mother's lap. She caught the brown head close to her breast for a moment, then put him hastily down as a wailing cry came to her ears. The baby in the homemade cradle beside her had wakened. The woman stopped wearily, picked him up, then sat down to nurse him. "You'll have to wash up, Betsy," she said. Molly's thought traveled far, but she hadn't herself had time to move. She was still sitting bolt upright on the 3-legged stool when her ears picked up the roll of a horse's hoof. Nor was she the only one. The others heard too. As if in answer to an unexpected signal, the faces turned inquiringly, and all eyes found the door. All ears strained for a call of greeting, but none came. In less time than it takes for 3 words to be said, the door burst open and a man stumbled in. It was neighbor Wheelock. He was short and heavy like Thomas Jemison. He, too, had the naughty look of a hard worker, of a frontier fighter. It was only in his face that weakness showed. Wheelock gave no glance at woman or children. He said in a low but distinct voice to Thomas, "You heard what's happened?" The clatter of a falling stool shook the silence, and a cry of fear escaped. Betsy, white-faced and thin, clapped her hands over her mouth. Miss Jamison, the nursing baby still at her breast, stood up. "Let's hear what it is," she said calmly. Chet Wheelock needed no invitation to speak. The words popped out of his mouth like bullets from a loaded gun. So what do you think he's going to say? This is their neighbor who's come unannounced, burst into their home, hasn't been invited in, just burst in. What do you think he's going to tell them? Well, I predict that we may start to see some Indian action. "It's the Injuns again," he cried fiercely. "They've burnt Ned Haskins out and took his wife and children captive. They've murdered the whole Johnson family. They're heading down Conwango Creek towards Sharp's Run, a killing, a butchering, and a plundering as they come. They're in a safe spot this side of Philadelphia." Philadelphia. Sounds pretty close to Philadelphia, which would be in Pennsylvania. So that kind of gives you a geographic location. So we're talking about Pennsylvania. "I'm headed back east, and I'm taking my brother Jonas's family with me." Thomas Jameson looked up from his corn shelling, but his placid face gave no hint of troubled thoughts. A gust of wind nipped round the house and blew the thick plank door shut with a bang. The children stared wide-eyed. Jane Jamison sat down on a stool as if the load of her baby had grown too heavy and there was no more strength left in her arms. "What are we going to do, Thomas?" she asked weakly. "Do?" cried Thomas. "Why, plant our corn, I reckon." "You won't be needing corn, neighbor," Chet Wheelock spoke slowly. Then he added, his eyes full of serious. "You ain't aiming to come along with us, then?" Thomas Jameson rose to his feet. He thumped his big double-up fist on the table, his heavy fist that looked like a gnarled knot in an old oak tree. "We're staying right here," he said. "But, Thomas, if Chet said the Indians are headed this way," began Jane. Thomas stood up tall and gaunt. He laughed loudly. "I ain't afraid of Injuns," he cried. "I've lived here for 8 years, and I ain't been molested yet. There's been Injuns in this part ever since we first set foot in this clearing. We've heard tell of so many raids, so much plundering. I don't put much stock in them tells. No, I don't give up easy, not me." John and Tom, the 2 boys, laughed too. "Who's afraid of Injuns? Let 'em come," they cried in boastful tones. Jane put the baby down quickly in its cradle. She caught her husband desperately by the arm. "Don't you hear, Thomas? Chet says they've murdered the whole Johnson family. We can't live here with Indians on all sides devouring the settlement. Forget the corn." "We're staying here," I said, repeated Thomas. "Come what may, I'll plant my corn tomorrow." His voice rang hard, like the blow of a blacksmith's hammer against the anvil. We're going to stop here for today. So I want you to think, what's going to come next for this family? Do you think that they'll see Indians at their home really soon? Or do you think we're going to hear more tell of their settlement being disturbed first? And what about Mary or Molly, how she's referred to? What do you think about her going into the woods to fetch this neighbor Dixon's horse? Do you think it would be safe for her? I want you to think about that. We'll meet you back here soon.